I'm Jeffrey Rickman, and this is PlainSpoken. This is a show that's turned into a two-part weekly show because there's so much stuff I want to cover, and it takes a lot of time to do that, so I'm glad you joined me. This is part one. This is a part where I start with a Wesleyan meditation, and then we cover some developments in primarily the United Methodist Church broadly, but also sometimes the Wesleyan movement and sometimes my conference in particular. So I always begin with the Wesleyan Reflection, and today I thought it'd be good to cover a section of John Wesley's sermon, Justification by Faith, and this concerns the doctrine of penal substitutionary atonement and the doctrine of the fall, two foundational Christian doctrines, and if that doesn't mean anything to you, I'll explain it in a minute. I wanted to read about 5 paragraphs, and I know that sounds like a lot, and it might sound dry and dull, but it's not. So listen to this. He begins with how humans were in the state of Eden. Such then was the state of man in paradise. By the free, unmerited love of God, man was holy and happy. He knew, loved, enjoyed God, which is in substance life everlasting. And in this life of love he was to continue forever if he continued to obey God in all things. But if he disobeyed him in anything, he was to forfeit all. In that day, said God, thou shalt surely die. This is in Genesis, okay? The very beginning of the Bible. Man did disobey God. He ate of that tree which God commanded him, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. And in that day he was condemned by the righteous judgment of God. Then also the sentence whereof he was warned before began to take place upon him. For the moment he tasted the fruit, he died. His soul died, was separated from God, separate from whom his soul has no more life than the body has when separate from the soul. His body likewise became corruptible and mortal, so that death took hold on this also. And being already dead in spirit, dead to God, dead in sin, he hastened on to death everlasting, to the destruction both of the body and soul in the fire never to be quenched. Was John Wesley a hellfire and brimstone preacher? Yes. Thus, by one man, sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men. So not just Adam, unto all of us, as being contained in him who was the common father and representative of us all. Thus, through the offense of one, all are dead, dead to God, dead in sin, dwelling in a corruptible mortal body, shortly to be dissolved and under the sentence of death eternal. For as by one man's disobedience all were made sinners, so by that offense of one judgment came upon all men to condemnation. So it's not just Adam, it's all humans ever born. In this state we were, even all mankind, when God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, to the end that we might not perish but have everlasting life. In the fullness of time, Jesus was made man, another common head of mankind, a second general parent, and representative of the whole human race. He's saying he's a new Adam. And as such, it was that he bore our griefs, the Lord laying upon him the iniquities of us all. All of our sins got put on him. Then was he wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities. He made his soul an offering for sin. He poured out his blood for the transgressors. He bare our sins in his own body on the tree, that by his stripes we might be healed. And by one oblation of himself once offered, he hath redeemed me and all mankind, having thereby made a full, perfect, and sufficient sacrifice and satisfaction for the sins of the whole world. In consideration of this, that the Son of God hath tasted death for every man, God hath now reconciled the world to himself, not imputing to them, us, our former trespasses. And thus, as by the offense of one judgment came upon all men to condemnation, even so by the righteousness of one the free gift came upon all men unto justification, so that for the sake of his well-beloved Son, of what he hath done and suffered for us, God now vouchsafes on one only condition, which himself also enables us to perform, both to remit the punishment due to our sins, to reinstate us in his favor, and to restore our dead souls to spiritual life as the earnest of life eternal. And then it goes on to the new covenant. And it's all good, and I hate to stop there. But why would I drag you through all these paragraphs? It's because the division our denomination is in is not based at the touchstone on human sexuality. That is an outgrowth of these foundational issues. The people that typically, I'm not saying 100% of the time, I'm saying 99% of the time, the people that take issue with the biblical stance to sexual identity, sexual behavior, are the same people that question the doctrine of the fall. Are we really all born in sin, alienated from God, broken, worthy of damnation? And then, did we really need Jesus to die on the cross to restore our relationship to God? These two doctrines, the fall and penal substitutionary atonement. The notion of penal is punishment, that sin from a righteous God will be punished. We deserve to get punished, but Jesus took our sin upon himself, and God poured out his wrath on Jesus on the cross, punishing him for our sins. That's something that the Bible talks about. A lot of people say, oh, John Wesley, he didn't really have that penal substitutionary atonement thing. That's the Calvinists, that's the Reformed people. No, that's John Wesley. That's Methodist. That's all true believers believe that Jesus paid the price that I couldn't pay. He lived a life I couldn't live. He was perfectly righteous and sinless, and he paid the price that I couldn't pay. And what happened on the cross, yes, is grotesque, but is absolutely necessary for my salvation. And if it hadn't happened, I could not be saved. Neither can you. So that comes down to, are all people basically good? Liberals would say yes. Humanists would say yes. Conservatives, no. None of us is born good. We're born perverse and wicked in all of our ways, and something supernatural has to happen to save us. And that's what happened on the cross. That's what happens at the justification of every believer. And that's what has happened to all born-again believers who now live transformed lives in the light of Christ. Once upon a time, Methodists were known for living these kind of lives, having very transformed lives, having their innermost nature changed, having experienced the new birth, having experienced the Holy Spirit testifying that we are children of God. And that's something that we need to be driving for again. And that is not the end goal. The end goal is not we're going to have the right sexual ethic. The end goal is we're going to have a biblical approach to life that results in a holy sexual ethic amongst 1,000 other things that are currently off kilter because we have not maintained the doctrinal standard that we have needed to. Now, before I go on, a lot of people are saying right now, the United Methodist Church, we have those doctrines in place. You will find those doctrines in the Book of Discipline, and yes, you will. In the Articles of Religion, they are firmly ensconced there. Problem is, the people in leadership don't care what's there. They're not maintaining that standard. They're not listening to pastors' sermons to make sure they reflect that. They're not asking those questions on the front end in the Board of Ordained Ministry a lot of the time. People are making it in who don't believe this stuff, and then they're leading other people to think that these things are not important. They're foundational. They are non-negotiable. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. This is America, but you're wrong. So I'm going to go on, and I want to introduce my guest for today. This is Kira Calhoun-Wilson, and I've known Kira for several years now. We actually met when we were training to become foster parents. Me and my wife met Kira there, and we're just really impressed with her and who she is and how she lives. And she is a United Methodist pastor. And the name of your church, tell me again, I'm sorry,
Southern Hills.
Southern
United
Hills.
Methodist Church.
I want to care about Southern Hills. It's in the heart of Tulsa, or it's in Tulsa. It's very far or very close to the center of power, whereas we are very far away in Nowata. But you've been there for some time, and we're gonna learn a lot about you in part 2. But for right now, Kira has a perspective on ministry that is very different from mine. Not just because she's a woman, but she has grown up in certain circles that I haven't. She knows a lot of people that I don't. She is much more connected to the evangelical resurgence and like reclaiming charismatic worship than I have been. I'm much more of like an Oxford Methodist. I'm all about reviving the Book of Common Prayer, and she's much more tied to, I think, Kevin Watson and those guys, the Upper Room, and I've watched Kira be moved by the Holy Spirit to go to minister to somebody that she didn't know from Adam, and saw a need in them that was not visible to the eye. So very much like my first interviewee, who also had a walk with the Holy Spirit that was very different from mine. So anyway, I don't know what Kira is going to say. She and I have talked several times. She's in the same denomination. We have a lot of the same basic theological convictions. However, no part of me thinks she sees things exactly the same. So I said before we started, you can contradict me, you can tell me I'm wrong. Just because it's my show doesn't mean that I'm right about everything. Although I am right about the opening doctrine I talked about. Kira, anything you want to say before we digest some of these news stories?
Thanks
together?
for having me.
Yeah.
Excited to be talking about the Methodist Church and what's going on.
Yeah, it's concerning, and maybe I think we'll agree on most of the things that are concerning. The first thing I wanted to talk about was Jay Thorell. I said it was Jay Thorell's recent article, but it's an article by Chris Ritter, actually, released on September 9th. I think that was yesterday, actually. Yeah, no, it's today. I don't know why it's dated today. I read it yesterday, so this is falsely dated. But this is about disaffiliation and the coming drop deadline. Somehow I didn't even catch it's not a coming deadline, it's a drop deadline. You're going to drop dead if you don't make it out by the deadline. So were you able to read this whenever? Okay, so how would you summarize this article?
That there's an end and it's coming fast. And if you don't get out, you're kind of stuck and there's nothing left.
So when we're saying there's an end to what?
An end to us, I say us, the evangelicals or the conservatives of the United Methodist Church, getting out. There's an end date, and if you don't get out, there may not be a getting out for you at the end of 2023.
Yeah. Okay, so prior to just a couple weeks ago, we had some disciplinary provisions, the main one being paragraph 2548.2, which had been used for decades for churches that discerned they were no longer happy partners in this covenant relationship, that they could exit with their property and membership in tow. The Judicial Council, we covered this last week on the show, discerned that could no longer be applied. The 2019 General Conference created a new paragraph 2553 that expires at the end of 2023, end of next year, that is now the only provision that can be used to exit the denomination. And that doesn't even apply to the central conferences outside of the United Methodist Church. So there was a central conference that voted to leave. There was a Judicial Council decision saying you can't do that. There are annual conferences here in the U.S. that have voted that they want to leave, and even though they are the primary unit of the UMC, and even though we had a Judicial Council decision making room for that, the Judicial Council said you actually can't do that because the General Conference never designed a method for you to do that. So hypothetically you can, but we never wrote down the method, so you actually can't. It doesn't matter what you vote. So here, Chris Ritter warns that the denomination is going to change. Hasn't yet in our book of discipline. The flavor of it already has and is. But after 2023, paragraph 2553 expires. That's the only way out. And he's pessimistic that General Conference 2024 is going to make another way out. So I highlighted one paragraph at the bottom here. He kind of does some explaining of what's going on. It was interesting. He used Nickelback as an example of you showed up to one thing and you're actually getting a Nickelback concert, and you can only get out through the fire escape if you follow a certain process. Very interesting metaphor. But he says, if I'm right on this, the losers are traditionalists, that's conservative, evangelical, orthodox, we use these interchangeably, lulled into complacency. Now, when he's talking about that, I think he's saying, right now, we're being lulled to complacency by people saying, oh, we're maintaining the discipline, we're not changing the doctrine, conservatives, you have nothing to be afraid of. There are a lot who hear that. We're going to talk about that with the African thing. They're being lulled into complacency, he says. There is a lingering narrative among some Methodists that the United Methodist Church's teachings, at least on paper, are still orthodox, and there is no reason to exit until General Conference acts. But the illusion that General Conference runs the UMC has been dispelled. So who's running the UMC if not the General Conference?
The bishops.
Yeah, the Council of Bishops.
Yeah.
That's what's being alleged by conservatives right now. In the face of certain division, institutional-minded Methodists are getting what they always wanted, an exit just wide enough to bleed off the most motivated traditionalists and their leaders. The door will then be once again locked. Does that sound like a conspiracy theory to you, or does that sound real?
It is not real at all. It is actually very disheartening. I mean, it's very true,
Right.
But what we're dealing with right now is heart-wrenching.
Okay.
And this,
So you would say this plan is a real plan by the Council of Bishops then?
I don't think it is.
Really?
I think that it may be a conspiracy theory, honestly.
Okay, so you think in 2024 they might design another way out, and that conservatives really don't need to be fighting their way out the door right
No,
now?
they need to be fighting their way out the door. So maybe it's not a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, when I say
know.
conspiracy theory, I mean not based in truth or reality, that
Okay.
this is not how it's going to be.
Okay, then there is not a way out in 2024. Is 2024 really going to happen? Do we know? No.
Oh, you
Right?
think they might even cancel
Right.
General
I do.
Conference 2024?
I do. I wonder.
So you're even
if
more of a
they're-
conspiracy theorist than I am.
I'm
Oh
so
my goodness.
sorry. You're going to learn so much.
So yeah, we were supposed to have General Conference last year and this year, and both times they canceled it last year because everybody was still very concerned about COVID. This year, because supposedly the African delegation couldn't get visas, couldn't get their vaccines, and I was digging into this again this morning. I hadn't fully appreciated. You have the Africa Initiative, then you have the group of bishops that just released their thing, and then there's another left-leaning African caucus. I can't figure out how big or powerful they are, but different ones. The Africa Initiative that I follow with Jerry Kula said, we're ready, don't cancel. But then I didn't see the institutionalist one that said, we think they're lying, we're not ready, cancel. So we've had this very confusing picture for some time. Everybody's been under the understanding 2024 is definitely going to happen, but you're of the mind that if the deck is not stacked in the favor of left-leaning Council of Bishops, that they're even going to cancel that one.
Yeah.
I had not heard that.
Yeah. I think.
Is that your own idea, or have you heard somebody else say that?
No, I've done it by myself just thinking about it. Really, like 2020 was canceled. That was an acceptable closure, I think. You know, everybody was just in the face of COVID-19 and they were like, we don't know what this is going to be like. The borders are closing, so nobody could get here. So if we would have had it then, let's be real, General Conference wouldn't have gone in the traditionalist favor by any means, I believe. If we would have had
You don't
it.
think it would have gone into
I
traditionalist
don't think it would
favor?
have gone into traditional favor in 2020 without.
Really, even after 2019?
Yeah, after 2019, I don't think it would have. I think it would have been a nastier battle than we saw in 2016.
Well, 2019 was the worst.
Well, 2019 was bad, but 2016
was pretty
well,
bad. Oh, okay. Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And so I don't think it would have been any prettier than that.
It would have been nasty, but I think
Yeah.
traditionalists, I think what would have happened, so what did happen was the Council of Bishops did not have a traditional plan prepared. It got submitted ad hoc on the conference floor, incomplete. It was adopted anyway, and then they wanted to correct a lot of the flaws of it to make it enforceable and fair. They wanted to have a much fairer provision than paragraph 2553. And liberals at that point stalled the whole process intentionally. You had a guy get up there. He said, these are all the amendments we've got. We're going to hold things off till the monster trucks roll in, because there was a monster truck rally scheduled immediately afterwards. So what got instituted was a very incomplete plan. I think if they'd gotten together the next year, the conservatives still would have had the votes. They would have closed all those loopholes, designed a much better way to exit out, and everything would have been fine.
I don't know. I feel like the liberals might have stalled more.
There's only so much stalling you can do. So I remember when they finally called the vote on the traditional plan, that was a liberal bishop.
Yeah.
Couldn't put it off anymore.
Right.
So there's only so much that you can do once conference is in session
Very
to stall things.
Yeah.
And I think it's really a tragedy. I don't think there's any way they designed COVID to be released at that time, but they definitely did not let that crisis go to waste.
Right. Not at all.
And then for several years used it to, when people went behind the back of the Council of Bishops and negotiated the protocol for peaceful separation, this was something that they could not allow to happen. And so that's why General Conference continued to be canceled. They did not explore options of remote conferencing. And now they've designed, I didn't think they could do it. According to Chris Ritter, and I find myself sympathetic here, they've designed an ideal scenario where they get rid of the richest, most vocal conservative voices, and all that's left is poor, rural, outnumbered, bullied churches like me and mine.
Right. That can't do anything.
Yeah,
they're stuck.
And over time, what they're saying right now is, if you stay, it's a big tent. We're going to make room for you. It's going to be okay. We're not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. And then, is that real? Because I covered last week with James, when you have unapologetic conservative voices, look at the things that left-leaning voices say about them. Look at what Stan Copeland said about Mark Tooley. Look at the way that they not only impugn your motives, but speak to your salvation and say that you're this demonic presence that John Wesley is pissed at. If that's the sort of stuff being said right now, are we imagining that those voices will suddenly be nice once they finally have taken over? Is that a real... I think some people realistically expect that. Just, once we're secure, we'll be nice. Is that a realistic expectation?
No, not at all. I think that true colors have come out. And, a lot of liberal people are saying that to the conservative people. You guys are showing your real colors. You're being nasty. You're not telling the truth. But the face of the matter is, look at what's actually going on. The evangelical movement is being pushed out of, John Wesley's doctrine is being pushed out of the United Methodist Church. And I think that's a nasty bit of it. And these people are being nasty now. I don't think that's going to change when everything's secured. I think it's going to probably continue to be the same because the true colors have been bled out. Yeah. And here we are.
Yeah. To imagine that. Well, it's like when someone has a troubled marriage and they think, oh, we just need to have a child and then everything will come out right. And that's not how relationships work. If you're not good already, to imagine that things will be better if you just shift something without dealing with the foundational disagreement. Well, it's a fiction. I mean, I understand children thinking that. But where are the adults in the room? Where are the people that actually read some church history or some human history and understand human nature? We imagine, what I try and do on this show is say, we're all human. We all have these natural proclivities towards self-interest, self-justification. Can we at all have a conversation where we're not doing that? So I'm trying to bring the conversation to, here are the assumptions that conservatives are bringing in. Are they valid assumptions? And I think so far we're finding there don't seem to be many. I mean, I'm sure there are hysterical voices that are running around saying the sky is going to fall. But for the most part, concerns seem to be well warranted. And it seems odd at this point not to have concerns. So we'll talk about that more, I'm sure. It's time to talk about the bishop's statement on guns. And I didn't intend for this show to be about the bishops so much. However, if it turns out that the Council of Bishops is exercising undue control and influence in our denomination, it would be odd for us not to talk about them. They got together last week for several days. I don't remember the exact dates. They were supposed to come up with a uniform policy for how churches could exit under 2553 in all the annual conferences. They didn't do that for some reason. But what they did do was come up with a statement called A Call to Prayer and Action in Response to Gun Violence. So I've been talking enough. Would you mind reading? I think it's only a 2-page document. Yeah. Would you mind reading this for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So it says, we are called as United Methodist bishops to respond to the devastation and disruption due to gun violence. Communities around the world are traumatized. We are facing a global and national health crisis, and children, families, and communities are left with the emotional scars that beg for angels of mercy and the healing balm of Gilead. The Bible declares in Exodus 20:13, "Thou shalt not kill." Yet gun violence continues to escalate. In 2021 and 2022, 43 million more guns were sold in the United States, in addition to the 400 million guns already owned. As of June 2022, the United States has experienced over 300 mass shootings in this year alone. Gun violence is more than a U.S. problem. Across the globe, 44% of all homicides involved guns. According to Amnesty International, 2,000 people are injured every day by gunshots, and more than 500 of them die. The church is called to be an instrument of God's grace. As people of prayer, we followers of Jesus are called to be counter-cultural change makers. To that end, we must reject the idolatry of guns and the disordered attachment to our right to own guns without safeguards for the communities of the world. This is a call to prayer, beginning this September for all who follow Jesus, the Prince of Peace. This is a call to action for all to weep with those who weep and demand, insist on, and push for positive change from our elected officials. As United Methodists, we have made our claim for a more excellent way to live and bring change. The Book of Resolution, paragraph 3428 in the 2016 says, as followers of Jesus called to live into the reality of God's dream of shalom, as described by Micah, we must address the epidemic of gun violence so that he may teach us his ways and the way we may walk in God's paths. Therefore, we call upon United Methodists to prayerfully address gun violence in their local context. This call to prayer is not a shallow request, but one that firmly believes that the collective prayers of God's people will keep this issue in the forefront of our consciousness and guide our intentional discernment of the action needed to bring about change. The United Methodist Council of Bishops commits to lead as peacemakers and prophetic witnesses to make our communities safer by reducing the tragedy and trauma of daily homicides and suicides. We call people to prayer and to work with ecumenical and interfaith partners in our public witness. We call for congregations to use United Methodist Church resources for Bible study and advocacy in their efforts to reduce gun violence. We support the ban on assault weapons and urge church and government support for communities affected by the trauma of gun violence. We are committed to sharing Christ-centered compassion as we walk alongside those who have been victims of gun violence. We call on all United Methodists to advocate for safer communities, safer schools, and building bridges to beloved community. And it's signed the Bishops of the United Methodist Church.
Look at all these bishops. Pages and pages of bishops signed this.
Retired.
If not every single bishop, then the vast majority of bishops. Look at all the. I'm bored. I'm not going to scroll all the way down. So you've been talking. Let me pitch this a little bit, but I know you have a lot of thoughts on this document. The first thing, just the nitpicky thing, I'm pretty sure if you're going to quote from the King James, it's thou shalt not kill. And then at the end, it's we call on all United Methodists. It should be an S there. It just seems sloppy to me. It just seems like if you want to be taken seriously as a professional organization, have somebody proofread this stuff. Secondly, though, the first most important thing is it seems to me that this is a virtue signaling to people of the Democratic Party. And there are certain telltale things here. The reference to assault weapons, where was that?
There. We support the ban on assault weapons and urge church and government support for communities affected by trauma of gun violence.
So the term assault weapon is not a real thing. That is not a category of weapon that has been defined, that has clear limits. It's just it's a Democrat talking point. Now, to be clear, are you and I and other conservative United Methodists, are we big fans of guns, and do we worship them and think that everybody should have them and use them all the time? No. So when we critique this, there's this temptation people have to go, oh, you don't agree with this? You must agree with the opposite. And that's not the case. So if that's not where we are, what's the conservative critique of this? What could we possibly see wrong with this exhortation to the world to stop the proliferation of spreading weapons that are used to kill men, women, and children around the world every day? Do you see these numbers? We're traumatized, Kira. Why would anyone be against this?
Yeah, so when I first read this, I thought of two things. First, when I moved from Sapulpa to Bristow at my first appointment, I'll be honest, I own a gun. Okay. As a single woman, I'm no longer single, but as a single woman who had children, it was important for me to be able to safely keep my house. And so that's that I grew up in Western Oklahoma. Of course, we had guns. My parents had guns. My dad taught me how to shoot guns. And so that gun was stolen when we moved. I had it in a safe. I had specifically told the movers, like, don't touch this. And I went back to grab it, and it wasn't there. Moved to Bristow, got there, it wasn't there. I called the people. The company did nothing for us. Like, this handgun is now in the hands of somebody who shouldn't have it, and that was scary. And this brought that to me.
Well, yeah, someone on the left would hear about that and go, well, you shouldn't have had the gun in the first place. Now it's on the streets and it's going to be used to kill somebody,
Right,
Kira.
right.
Yeah.
And that worries me too, that thought, right?
Sure, of course it does.
But that's exactly the thoughts that go through people's mind. And that's not fair, because although we're traumatized, there's also protection that has to be handed down. So my second thought when I read this was, I work, not live, but I work in one of the most diverse communities in Tulsa. I use the word community very loosely because there are communities in Tulsa. But the first 7 homicides of Oklahoma was in my neighborhood of my church. Not to mention that 90% of the shootings that happen in Tulsa are in my neighborhood of my church. So I ask myself, how is my church directly impacted? How are my people directly impacted by this statement from the bishops?
Yeah.
Right? My community is traumatized. My people are traumatized because of gun violence. However, like, what are we actually doing to stop it? Right? But we have to have this balance of traumatized and protection. And that may be me going really out there with my thoughts, but that's my biggest thing.
Yeah.
What can we do? And I don't think that answered your question, but
I mean,
those
it
were
does.
my
I
two
mean,
thoughts.
I'm not thinking that you and I are going to come up with like a clear, here's the policy they should have said, but this is more like holding this up to a biblical standard and a realist standard. And I do believe in Christian realism to a degree. I don't think we should be slaves to whatever we think is realistic. But we do, I think, bear the responsibility of looking at what are going to be the implications if someone just takes this at face value and adopts this. And if we're really advocating for assault weapons to be banned, what is the realistic outcome of that? Are we imagining that we're going to be able to recollect all of the assault weapons that are out on the streets already? That's a fiction.
Right.
You know, we've got decades of war on drugs to show that you can create whatever laws you want, but if the human heart is predisposed towards something, it's going to do that. Realistically, when you look at the effect of weapons bans, you're looking at the law-abiding people are no longer going to do it. The lawless are going to continue to get their hands on what they want. And then the question is, do you want vulnerable people to be vulnerable to those who are lawless? So some things that people don't necessarily know about gun violence in the U.S. or the world. Gun violence around the world is actually lower now than it has been for a century. You know, ever since guns were created and took gun violence and violence in general has been on the decline for some time. Now with geopolitics being what they are right now and everything devolving, that might be rising. However, the problem there is not proliferation of guns. It's people being miserable and sinful. You know, here you have, to my understanding, an organization whose primary central emphasis is on getting right with God, being in right relationship with God. And if you solve that problem, nobody's going to be killing anybody. But we're trying to treat the symptoms rather than the problem. We're trying to say, just take away the guns and people won't be violent anymore, at least not on the same level. And I'm not sure that's borne out at all by the data. Also, when you look at this being in the context of America, we see ourselves as a particularly violent people. And in some senses we are. We do own more guns per capita than any other culture. However, when you look at the vast majority of gun violence and gun deaths, it takes place within a few square blocks of America. We're talking about urban areas in several cities, especially across the eastern seaboard, but also the north and even in Tulsa. This is what we see. We're not seeing a general gun violence problem. We're seeing violence problems within victim communities that victimize themselves within, and systematically have had police presence removed so that outlaws with guns rule the roost. I saw a very interesting thing. I didn't get to read it, but Reason Magazine made the case yesterday in an article that the reason that we saw a decline in lynchings of the black population in the South in America is not because of new laws getting passed. It's because of proliferation of guns in the black community. White guys decided they just didn't want to take the risk of a black guy defending himself with a gun. Guns are the great equalizer between people. Without guns, you have the might of strong men against the weak. We're talking about something that evens the scales. Now, are there going to be guns in the kingdom of heaven?
No.
No, there's going to be no need for guns. Yeah. But the thing is, we're not in the kingdom of heaven right now. And so what do we do about that? And for some people, I guess the instruction is act like we are. But the thing is, unless you're ready to die, and most of us aren't, and that's a whole other issue. Unless you're ready to die, this is a fictitious way to go about life. This also ties into a theology that's very disturbing within mainline church, which is we're going to build the kingdom. I find myself increasingly hostile to that way of life. I believe that the kingdom is something that Jesus brings in his time, that we can't build it. Well, this is what I think the flaw of communism was. We have discerned what the perfect society will be. We're going to create a bunch of laws and make everybody do it now. And it never works. It always results in complete destruction. It's only Jesus, the King of Peace, that is going to come and institute his kingdom. We can't build it in any way. You're nodding your head. You don't disagree with me?
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I find it very strange when a covenant community, Christians, says everybody should act like us. And of course, the lefties hate it when right-leaning people do it. Oh, everybody should maintain our sexual ethic. Everybody should vote against Democrat policy. You know, they hate when conservatives, but then they say, well, the Bible says thou shalt not kill. So everybody, we shouldn't kill each other. Never mind the laws that are already on the books. But that's such an unself-aware thing to offer, to say, well, the Bible says, so this is what everybody should do. We're not in the position to do that as the church. What we get to say is, here's how Christians should behave. Here is the way of Christ in the world. And if they put out a call just saying, United Methodists shouldn't own guns, I would think that has more integrity than this, which is nobody should own guns, and we should advocate for these laws and policies. At that point, I'm going, oh, they're just signaling to everybody, this is going to be the Democrat Party denomination, and if you're not happy with it, pay a bunch of money to get out, or stay and change your mind. But if you're going to be a United Methodist, you have to be against guns now.
Right. It's just a giant Band-Aid being put on not only this issue, but the issue of the United Methodist Church, right?
Yeah, if we just get clear, if we make everybody Democrats, we'll all get along now.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Isn't true. But yes, that's essentially what's happening, is they want us to be of one mind, right? Which we are called to be of one mind of Jesus Christ, not one mind of bishops, not one mind of, oh, I feel like I'm talking so bad about the bishops right now.
Yeah.
But really, like, who's our higher authority?
Yeah.
I mean, is it Jesus Christ, or is it the Council of Bishops? Is it my parents? Is it your parents? Who is it that we are called as Christians? As Christians, not just United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
To authoritate to.
Yeah.
It's Jesus.
Well, and how does power work? Do we, as the church, get our one mind from bishops? You know, I remember in 2016 at General Conference, it was looking very clearly like traditionals were carrying the day, and there was this Hail Mary pass from a gal who got up and said, we need our bishops to lead. And so I think that was the point at which the bishop said, okay.
Let's
we can
go.
lead. Yeah, we'll lead you. But the thing is, I don't think that's how the church is. We have the lordship and the headship of Christ himself, known exclusively through the scriptures, one other thing that we argue about. But then that consensus emerges not by bishops saying, this is what we believe and shall believe. At that point, it becomes a grassroots consensus by those under the authority and headship of Christ directly. And the role of the bishops is to shepherd the flock in the ways of Christ that are discerned collectively rather than top down. So, I realize what I presented is going to sound like gobbledygook to a lot of people, but I would say that the role of bishops, maybe within the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, yeah, sure, they set their own, well, and that's why Protestants left, though. We started saying that the doctrine you guys are designing is very different from what we encounter in the Bible. And that's what one could say to this gun policy right here. And it's not that we're not the way people of shalom, blessed are the peacemakers, that's clearly there. But you also have the 10 Commandments written for the people of Israel, who then went and committed genocide against the people of Canaan, who carried weapons and were a violent, practicing holy bands on the. So it's just one of these things where you have to just blot out half the Bible in order to walk with this. And when you have leaders that blot out half the Bible to create a new, seemingly increasingly worldly ethic, then you're just going, what are we a part of here? I don't know that I want to be a part of this. And it's not that I don't want to live, I want to live that's why I pray thy kingdom come. Because in the kingdom, there won't be any killing, there won't be any death. But while I'm here, I want bishops that are going to direct me towards Jesus, not towards government policy. And hysteria, we may or may not come back to this. I think we'll come to this in the second portion. As soon as the word trauma gets raised, I get skeptical.
Yeah.
Because the world has always been a traumatizing place. But as soon as you say, well, and it begins with, some people are saying this is what some people are experiencing. That's when I'm going, who? Right. And what's the cost? And is it realistic? And is it commensurate with the crime? So it just seems out of touch. I don't know. You get the last word on this before we move on.
Yeah, so the last thing that I'll say about the bishop's thing on the guns, you know what would have been more adequate, at least I think, and I think a lot of people will believe this, but probably not say it. If we wanted a root fix, because of any issue, there's always a root. Mm-hmm. The gun violence issue is not the guns. It's mental health.
Okay.
Really. I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah.
It's what can we do to stop the gun violence? Mm-hmm. And we should be addressing, the bishop should have addressed mental illness, mental health.
Well, so let me ask you then, and we can block this out if we want to, but are you sympathetic to the view that mental health is degrading and that we have a mental health epidemic globally?
I think that it's true that we have this issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
But do you think that mental health, that the same number of people have been mentally unhealthy across history, or do you think that there's something happening at this point in history where people's mental health generally is degrading more and more?
It's degrading more and more.
So what I would say, I wonder what you would say to this. The reason our mental health is degrading is because we're leading increasingly meaningless, materialistic, sinful, dead-end lives, and that the only solution to that is the Christian faith.
Jesus, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I would say the root issue is actually that people don't know Jesus. That If everybody came to know Jesus, it's not to say there would be no mentally ill people, right, but it's to say that this mental health epidemic would reverse. Gun crime would reverse. All of these trends we want to see would reverse. But Jesus says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added unto you. Right. And I think that's the distinctly Christian approach to life. Is the approach to life is not how you vote, not what policies you support, not what politicians you support. It's, are you right with Jesus?
Yeah.
And then everything else lines. Okay, you're sympathetic to that.
Yes,
okay.
I am. COVID-19 did it. I mean, I don't want to blame everything on COVID-19, but think about how many people left the church. How many people are not attending churches again?
Yeah.
They lost their sight of Jesus, just as you said. And if we could fixate our eyes back on Jesus, I think we'd be in a healthier place of a world because we would seek Jesus. And so I agree. I'll take back what I said about mental health being the root issue and people not following Jesus correctly.
Yeah, and the only reason I push back on that.
Yeah, that was good.
It's because once you keep it in the realm of public health, you're like, well, we need more therapists then, and we need to prescribe more drugs. Everybody has their policy that they're going to propose to that.
Right.
Here's my policy, Jesus.
Yeah.
And then, you right-wing fundamentalists, call me whatever names you want. Call me whatever names you want. If you're not prioritizing Jesus, this is going to continue to fall apart, and it's going to be your fault. because you're turning to a Band-Aid for a bullet wound rather than the balm of Gilead. They're going to talk about the balm of Gilead and not talk about the actual balm of Gilead. That's ridiculous. All right. You ready to move on?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so the next agenda item that I have, it begins with this article by John Lomperis. He apparently took on this project. Once the protocol got shut down, it did have some bishops on board. It had the general support of the church for some time. A couple months ago, the left-leaning factions pulled out and renounced it. So he was curious, okay, how do the bishops stand with this now? You know, we're entertaining this theory that the Council of Bishops is corrupting everything. Well, okay, one thing that would go against that theory is if there are bishops who would still be full-throatedly in support of the protocol, which would have allowed for conservatives to depart amicably and there to be no nastiness. So are bishops supporting it? So the first article I have here is Bishop Juan. He's in the Philippines. And as this article stipulates, and as I think everybody would agree, the Filipino United Methodist Church is right-leaning, evangelical, very friendly to the evangelical side. Even so, the bishop has now withdrawn his support from the protocol. So he actually has some quotes here of having written him and then Bishop Juan's responses. And he doesn't really reason it out. At one point he says, I don't support it because it implies separation. Well, it always implied separation. You're okay with it before, you're not okay with it now. So there's this one, but then the much more disturbing thing is this statement from the African bishops reputing the WCA and the Africa Initiative. So as I alluded to earlier, the Africa Initiative, Jerry Kula, I think, is at the head of it. This is, well, it doesn't have, oh, and they divided it up into two pictures. So I'm going to see if I can pull up this other scan here. Okay, yeah. Here it is. This is the actual statement. It's not long. Whereas we, the bishops of the United Methodist Church in Africa, remain committed to the teachings of the Bible and to the doctrines of the Christian faith and heritage. Very good. Whereas the Africa Initiative was created to advocate for African causes, issues, and representation in the United Methodist Church agencies and gatherings such as the General Conference. Fine. Whereas the Africa Initiative has lost its original goal of helping the United Methodist Church in Africa. That's not so fine. Whereas the Africa Initiative is now working with the Wesleyan Covenant Association to destroy our United Methodist Church. Where are we going? And whereas the Africa Initiative is working with and supporting the Global Methodist Church, a denomination that has not been recognized by the General Conference, therefore we, the bishops of the United Methodist Church in Africa, declare the following. Three things. We will dissociate from any activities of the Africa Initiative and will not allow any activities of the Africa Initiative in our areas. We will not allow or entertain any activities of the Wesleyan Covenant Association who are wrongly influencing God's people in our areas. And three, we will not tolerate anyone giving false information about the United Methodist Church in our areas. We will continue to be shepherds of all our God's people throughout our beloved continent. So not only is this a repudiation of the protocol, this is a repudiation of any conservative faction whatsoever that does not want to stay within the United Methodist Church. Now, on the front end, I'm sympathetic to this if we are of the mind that the United Methodist Church is the only Church of Jesus Christ. You cannot leave the only Church of Jesus Christ. I don't think any United Methodists believe that. I think we understand that we are one branch of a larger family tree, which is the Church of Jesus Christ. In which case, is it the cardinal sin to separate? No, that seems a bit ridiculous. However, that's what it's being treated as here. The Global Methodist Church is a separate break-off. The Wesleyan Covenant Association is here to facilitate those conversations and help congregations discern if they belong there. They say, nope, the Africa Initiative that is facilitating this is bad and corrupt. They no longer have the interests of the UMC at heart. And from now on, anything they're promoting related to this is persona non grata in Africa, in the continent of Africa. What's to be said about this, Kira Calhoun-Wilson?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I was really confused when I first read this.
Right.
Let's be real. Like, it's kind of contradicting in a way in my mind.
Okay.
I see it as like, okay, who's actually speaking here, first of all? Second of all, there's 20 or 21 bishops in Africa. How many of them actually signed it, right?
Yeah, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 signed it, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were not there, but they're sympathetic to it.
Okay, so sympathetic and agreeing.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so, right? We have these bishops who have, again, placed this document in front and said, okay, this is what we believe as the United Methodist Church of Africa. Is this all of Africa? No. So we're speaking again to a continent that is not in agreement, period.
Sure.
Right? One, this goes to relation to our bishops here as well. We're not all in agreement. Okay, we get this. But let me be clear. The Wesleyan Covenant Association is not a one side or one shoe fits all or whatever saying we want to put here, right?
Yeah.
I believe the purpose of the Wesleyan Covenant Association is to facilitate these conversations on both sides, to allow a separation nicely.
Yeah, we could have a conversation where, what does your congregation believe?
Right.
What is your doctrinal predisposition? Well, if it's that, you'd probably be happier in the UMC. You should say in the UMC. If it's this, we think the UMC is going to be hostile and you might consider joining this. That's all they're doing. And is it wrong to help people discern what covenant relationship they belong in?
I agree. And right here, this is saying that we are not going to be a part of this because you're destroying the United Methodist Church. What a stab, right? That's an untrue statement. Right here, we're saying we're done with these untrue statements, but you just put an untrue statement in your document.
Well, it's the realm of well, in a sense, it is true. I mean, stick a fork in it, the UMC is done. The dream of the UMC the dream of the United Methodist Church was a big tent group where we would have a lot of theological diversity and all still work together. It was a pipe dream. It doesn't work. It was an experiment. Experiment's over. It doesn't work. Right. It doesn't work.
Let's move on.
And it's not a sin to acknowledge that. What's happened now is power politics because that's what this devolves into.
Yeah.
It's the only way it was ever going to go, given human nature, given the nature of the necessity of doctrinal agreement within a covenant community. So to say that we're destroying the United Methodist Church is half true. The other half that's important is it's already done.
Right.
It's already dead. You're in denial if you want to believe that it can continue on the way it has. And I say that as my grandfather was a United Methodist pastor. My parents are United Methodist pastors. Stick a fork in it. It's done. And I know there are a lot of people, it breaks their heart. It kind of breaks my heart to hear that. I kind of cried whenever I was reading Mindy Dennison's letter on that last week.
Yeah.
But just because it makes us sad does not mean we're entitled to denial.
Right. I think there's a place for both sides, right? And it doesn't mean that we're together. It doesn't mean that we have to be under an umbrella. I mean, some of my dear friends in the Oklahoma Annual Conference are on the complete opposite side of me. And we can get together and we can have some of the most meaningful conversations that I've ever had that are purposeful and driven and Jesus focused. But we don't agree on what the scripture actually says, but we can walk away together and say it's okay because we still love each other because that's what Jesus wants us to do. And we eliminate the nastiness. We eliminate everything that goes on that people think actually go on, right? We're able to have this good friendship. And while I would love that to be the United Methodist Church, as a newer Methodist per se, I would love to see this denomination stay.
Yeah.
But it's things like this that cause us to be divisive.
Yeah, the thing that's particular to our era right now, and you see it all over, is the accusation of disinformation and lies.
Yes.
And it's not that nobody ever spreads disinformation and lies, but if you're going to level that charge, you have to be particular about what those are and why it's wrong. Yeah. You have to cite your sources. And the thing that's a problem is, and I think James focused on this last week, he said, it's Donald Trump with the accusation of fake news. It's fake news. And he said that, and that's his personality. But to imagine that now we can all act like Donald Trump and just dismiss anything we don't like as fake news is really embarrassing, The other thing we haven't talked about yet, I said it about the Filipino church. it's been widely known in our denomination for a long time that the African church is not at all sympathetic to liberalism, at all. There are individuals there that are sympathetic. I saw they even got one reconciling denomination or church, local church there, which is amazing and impressive in some demographic sense. But the vast majority are very conservative traditionalists and their predisposition. Yeah. So a lot of leftists look at this response and go, well, I guess not. I guess they're majority liberal. They're with us. And the assumption there is that the general will of the bishops reflects the general will of the people, when actually it's quite possible and even likely that this does not reflect the state of the average United Methodist in Africa, that this is another instance. I've referenced several times the News study that happened in 2018 that showed that even the United States of America, the majority of United Methodists are traditionalist conservative. So there seems to be this phenomenon that happens not just in America, but globally, where the people that trickle up to the top are those that lean left. And I need to dedicate, I'm sure there's a book on that somewhere. But for right now, that's just something that I'm seeing, and I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist. One thing, when you're trying to figure that out, you have to consult the voices of people who are actually over there, which is hard because people over there don't speak English. They're from a different culture. And so I found some comments on Facebook. This got posted yesterday. So it was on a conservative site. Conservatives, how do we make sense out of this? So this guy, Jim Mickelrath, who I don't think he's an African, but he's been there. He says, having visited and preached in the Katanga province in Congo, I believe this is as hypocritical as our bishops are in this country. The pew sitters in that area are as aghast at the sexual perversion by some of the council of bishops as we conservative evangelicals are in this country. It just seems that nowhere on the planet do bishops speak for the church. Everyone should have heard the statements by bishop defenders when Bickerton was quoted as stating that this book of discipline is invalid. Do you know what that's from? I don't know what he's talking about there.
I know that there was an issue with Bickerton. That's all that I remember.
Anybody who watches this later, if you know what he's talking about, send me a link, because I haven't seen this. Defenders were saying no bishop can speak for the church. So I guess it's true in Africa too. Bishops don't speak for the church. Please take the shepherd staff off of the symbol for bishops. And I'm with him till the end, where I'm like, okay, well, what does the bishop staff do? It takes a sheep that's going in the wrong way, so that's what they're doing. They're saying, church, you're wrong, so we're going to yank you back in place. And in Africa, I don't think I'm making a cultural assumption. I've seen a lot of evidence to show that here in America, we don't do well with authority, and bishops have to tread lightly. In Africa, bishops wield their authority much more brazenly, much more authoritatively, and these bishops, I do believe, are getting their crook and yanking their sheep and saying, get in line. Yeah. Let's look at a different comment. That one's too long, but this Josh Karimi guy, anyone who wants to stop on this, he is a graduate of Africa University. So, brief note on that. Africa University is one of our apportionments for the General United Methodist Church. It is a college where we are year after year indoctrinating people in United Methodist way of life and doctrine. There is an accusation sometimes that right-leaning groups are spending money on the African church to sway them without even looking at Africa University and looking at the millions of dollars that the institution has funneled that direction to form sympathetic institutionalist Africans. We've put thousands of people through that. Meanwhile, conservative caucus groups help them get vaccines and help them get communication tools when they get to the U.S. and help them get from the airport to where they need to go. That is not the same thing. Anyway, Josh Karimi, he starts taking offense at the conservatives going, this isn't right. But then I talked to him, and according to him, he ends with, most of us here in Africa don't know who is saying the truth or even the genesis of all that is happening. So people on the ground, they know what their bishops tell them. Most of them don't speak English, so they're not able to read our resources. They're just going, well, the bishops say this, the Africa Initiative says this, we're just going to pick our guy. And I've seen some weird reports. I don't know if you've seen this, but there have been incidents in different annual conferences or central conferences over there where the bishop has other enemy district superintendents or other people that are trying to spread information. They get the police involved. Yeah. They get these people arrested, and they start picking one side in this American battle just so that they can get American friends and money on their side. Have you seen any of
I
this?
have seen it. It's all over the news.
It's bananas.
It is crazy.
Well, and we think in America it's bad. It's actually, well, and Africans at different times have issued statements to us going, we know that you think you're the center, but look, we have actual witchcraft here. We have Islamic extremists trying to kill us here. It's a much more real scenario there. And the church takes itself even more seriously there than here. So anyway, Josh Karimi, I think we ended at a place where he's like, you know what? If people would just speak to us the way that you're speaking to us, we could get this figured out. But the thing is, they're having to trust the voices there, and a lot of the voices there are like here, not trustworthy.
Right.
This other African, Yayuba Basil Voila. Friends, is not all bishops signed. I'm laughing because it's just hard. The language barrier is hard. Therefore, any land have it on laws that land it. It takes effects on those issues of LGBTQ and homosexual activities. Finally, you can take Horse River, but not force it to drink water, which, of course, we have a similar saying in our language. But this lady, Donna, tries to figure out, whose side are you on? What are you talking about? And he ends up saying at the end, she says, so if I'm understanding correctly, the bishops who signed this are not speaking for the majority of the lady. And he says, all caps, absolutely correct. So this is what Africans on the ground are dealing with, that we're not being represented. Okay, I got that on there twice. Oh, this is the same guy. Let me ask some of our bishops to sign the press release. How many pressure groups do we have in Africa? You talk of the Africa Initiative. What about African Voice of Unity? I hadn't heard of these guys, but I looked them up. I read some of their stuff. It's a leftist caucus group in Africa.
Wow.
You are biased because African Voice of Unity is advocating your position and principles. That is why you didn't condemn the African Voice of Unity. Thank God Africans have different cultures. So what's happening in Africa is they're trying to centralize. So what's happened in America in our government, the executive has tried to centralize their authority so that they can exercise it on all of America. Same thing in the United Methodist Church. Our executive branch is consolidating power. And then that's apparently what's happening in Africa as well. The executives there, the bishops are consolidating their power and trying to exercise it on the people. It doesn't look like it's going well to me.
No.
I'm really wondering if there's going to be any kind of collective action against their bishops.
I hope so.
Yeah, we can hope.
But is it actually going to happen? I think it's just like how many charges can be placed here in America. Is it actually being done? The answer is probably not.
Yeah, well, just how much energy do people have for this stuff? You know, what we're seeing in America is a lot of the conservatives see how wrong this is, but rather than fighting, they're just saying, how much money do I need to pay you to get out of here?
And let me be done.
Yeah, I'm done. I want to get out of here. They feel like they've been fighting for a long time.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of these big church preachers, and they're going, I've been fighting this for decades, man. I'm done. I'm gonna write my check, and I'm gonna wash my hands of the UMC.
Yesterday, I sat at a table at a district event with all men at the table who some are my mentors, some I didn't know. And, you know, I say this jokingly, but I say this as a realistic thought too.
Mm-hmm.
One of them said, well, I have 7 years until I retire. And I said, I have 60 years till I retire. And he was like, you know, I've just been holding out.
Right.
Holding out. And when is it going to stop? That's a cry for help, right? And I'm over here like, oh my goodness, what is happening? What is going on? I have this long until I retire. I'm called to this ministry. Mm-hmm. But I feel like this cry that this pastor called out was, I'm tired. I'm weary.
So I'm meaner than you, where I've interpreted that as a desire for self-justification. You know, they see their long-term keeping their head down and acting nice as some form of doing battle.
Right.
But they haven't been battling them. They've been battling against their own conscience.
I agree.
And so they want permission from us to go, oh, you poor guy, you've really had to compromise a lot, and you've really had to tamp down your conscience. It must have hurt you so much. And actually, my response has been, you shouldn't have done that. Yeah. You should have been bolder. You should have been meaner. You know, God help us. We have this vision of Jesus that he was always nice for some reason. It's like we're not reading our Bibles. You know, it's like we're unfamiliar with Christian history, where generation after generation of Christian saints has been very mean. You know, St. Nicholas, our Santa, punched Darius in the
Not
face.
nice at all.
You know?
Yeah.
And I know that account is contested. But
Yeah.
even so, like, we have this large wellspring of history to draw on, but we have been indoctrinated into this false church. You want to talk about idolatry, the idolatry of niceness, where, there's some things that we shouldn't make room for. And the reason we're in this situation is we made room for things that shouldn't have been made room for.
I agree.
So, we ready to be done with?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about centrism. And we were disagreeing on this before the cameras turned on. This is from an article in Religion News for United Methodists, the center is not holding. And the tagline is, big tent centrists like Bishop Ken Carter have to face facts and give traditionalists a last push out. So this I didn't read the whole article, but I got far enough into it where I was like, okay, this is going to be helpful. Ken Carter is the Bishop of Florida that has seen some really icky shenanigans for some time. And even at the latest annual conference, they tried to shoo in some people that are not valid candidates for ministry. He's been very hostile to the conservatives in his annual conference. 106 of his conference churches that lean conservative have now individually filed suit against him in the annual conference through the National Center on Life and Liberty. And we're going to see what happens there. They're doing this in 3 other conferences that I know about. So there's initially a flattering, nice portrait of him painted, but it starts changing about here. And I don't think it gets nasty towards him. Carter has been quick to critique traditionalists for the increasingly nasty ways that they've handled themselves. Whatever, fine. I need to talk about that on another one because I just haven't. Anyway. But he has also lost the ability to critique the progressive side, which involves stating an obvious truth, lacking majority support to recast church law to match their beliefs. Liberal United Methodists simply ignore offending passages of the Book of Discipline, the denomination's governing text. They are living into the pro-LGBT denomination they want, not the anti-LGBT one that actually exists. And I would quibble with the title anti-LGBT, but whatever, let's move on. Another fantasy centrists adopt to accommodate progressives is the patently unbelievable notion that the only thing progressives wish to change is prohibitive language about same-sex relationships. Once they gain control over the church, or any church, as recent mainline Protestant history has shown, progressive Christians pursue further political and theological liberalization. The centrist insistence that traditionalist clergy and churches would be respected within a liberalized UMC, therefore, is at best undeliverable and at worst dishonest. And of course, James and I argued last week, is it dishonest to say that? He said, well, if you actually believe it, it's not dishonest. I think that there's willful ignorance. And I think people who make that case are willfully ignorant. But the larger conversation here is there such a thing as a centrist? You have this right-leaning position, which is sexual behavior and morality matters. And there are a wide range of sexual behaviors that God is offended by. And then there's a left-leaning position which says, we don't really want to talk about that. There might be some sexual acts that are not good. It's focused more on consent, really. But even there, the role of the church is not to judge, And we're going, yes, we need to judge rightly. No, the church is here to affirm, not to judge. These two extremes. We imagine that there's some group in the middle that goes, guys, we can all get along. Is that real? Is there such a thing as centrism that's a real thing? Is there a middle position between these two positions?
Yeah, I see the world in black and white, not gray. However, I know that we don't agree on this, but I believe that there are a thing called centrist. And I think these people are, as you said, quoted, the nicer of the two. They might be a little more left-leaning, but they're a little nicer, right? Now, we all know I am conservative. I am not far right conservative, but I am a conservative Christian. I fully believe what the Bible says is authoritative, and that's what we do, period. Most people would call me a centrist. I don't agree with that.
Why would they call you a centrist?
Because I'm leaning more towards the left on some things, but not the biblical truth, right?
Okay, well, we're just going to have to sit down for 6 hours sometime and figure it. Well, no, you don't report to me. But even so, that's interesting to me. So go on.
And so what I think is the person who's a centrist is a person who is almost straddling the fence, right? I would maybe even call it a heart that doesn't know who they actually are. And I
You're so much meaner than me. Oh, that's so offensive.
I'm sorry.
Keep going. I
I'm
love
sorry. And that's not a bad thing in this instance. Rather than maybe we should do some deep finding of actually who we are and who Jesus calls us to be. But then,
Well, wait, let me stop you for a second, because I do think I have a good question for that. If there is a heart that actually doesn't know who it is, should that heart be in ministry, in pastoral leadership?
That's a hard question.
It's not a hard question. The answer is quite obvious.
Yes, it is. It is obvious. But
it's hard to say out loud because it'll hurt people's feelings.
It will.
How dare you say I don't have a call, even though I haven't figured basic things out?
Right. And I think that our calls are so distinctively different that maybe this person who is at the centrist level doesn't need to be in, per se, a head pastoral position. Okay, right? So if I'm talking to myself, I think I know myself well enough to know that I am called to ministry. I know I'm called to the authoritative scripture. I know who Jesus is, and I know who Jesus has called me to be, right? So then I would remove myself off of that scale of a centrist if that was the weighing line of it.
Well, okay, here's another discerning question that I think is helpful. Do you believe in an ontological truth that stands outside of people and that judges all of us? Or do you believe that there are different standards of truth for different people that is determined in some sense by the individual conscience?
No, I believe Jesus is that.
Is the first one or the second?
The first one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you believe in an objective truth.
Right. That's what I'm supposed to believe, right?
Well, so that's what I would say any true Christian believes. However, there is, that's what liberalism is a questioning of that presupposition. So how are you a centrist again? I'm so sorry.
Right, that's
I'm
what
so
I'm
dense
saying.
here.
Most people would call me a centrist. I mean, really.
Most people are idiots. I don't know what to say to that.
Most people are idiots. And so, okay, let's
I shouldn't have said that.
It's okay.
Most people are not discerning about, so a lot of people just, I don't like labels, and that's laziness. Labels have a helpful role to play in relationships.
I agree.
And the labels that we own help us to be in right relationship with others. But when you say you're a centrist, that means that you're straddling a fence.
Yeah.
And the question is it a real place that you are in, or I think the thing that I've distilled from what you've said is there is no such place. These are people that have just not had the integrity or have not felt the weight to make a decision about where they're going to stand with integrity.
Correct. And that's a much meaner way of putting it. But yes. Or a more realist way of putting it, I think. Not necessarily mean, but let's play this out. How old are you, Jeff?
I'm about to be 38.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I know.
Okay. So I'm 27. And everybody in my category of young adults, let's put a young adult cap at 30. Okay? In this young adult group, who is conservative, who is liberal, and who is centrist? If you were to ask that question, if there is no label of what an actual centrist is, who is what? I would say that most people in the United Methodist Church or Christians in general, most of them are said to be more liberal. Okay?
You're saying in our conference?
I'm saying in general.
In general, younger people are more liberal in the United Methodist Church?
Yes. Okay? This is the eyes that are perceived in, okay?
Wait, you're saying that this is the case or this is how it's perceived?
This is how it's perceived.
Ah, okay. Okay, I'm with you.
The perception is that because I'm a young female, that I am a liberal.
Liberal, yeah.
Right? Okay, that's not true. We know this not to be true, okay? But in this case, that is what's meant to be, okay? And that's not a fair subjective look at anything through these lenses. But really, in a black and white world, we have placed this traditionalist and liberalism and this look of there's a line, the centrist line. And I think it's easier for people to navigate to the middle, just like whenever we're asking a yes-no question and there's a I don't know, 9 times out of 10 somebody's going to click the I don't know because they don't want to be offendable. They don't want to make a side. They don't want to do those things. And I think that's what encapsulates.
So
the young adults.
and the place where I actually don't think we disagree. I think if I push you hard enough, you'll agree with me. I would say that centrists are functionally liberals because they're not willing to take a stand. They're not willing to. What it comes down to is if it's between affirming and right judgment, they're not at all drawn to this.
I do agree with that.
So maintaining the standard and the banner of Christ, which is the explicit duty of leaders within the church, is not something they're actually interested in. They're interested in doing something else over here.
Right.
And then conservatives are the ones saying, that's not good.
Right.
You know, not only should we be able to do what we're called to do, but you really shouldn't be doing that over there. It's causing harm. And then they're going, we're causing harm. You're the one that's causing gay kids to kill themselves.
Right.
And that's why we can't get along anymore.
Right. And it's the affirmation maybe that may draw people to the liberal side, especially young people, because they want.
Yeah, who doesn't want to affirm?
Right. But the draw here is that's not true for the conservative side. Like, we are affirming people, but we're not as nice.
We love to affirm what we can affirm,
Right,
but our
exactly.
primary objective is not to affirm.
It's
well, and
to
when
be
you
the
look
hands and
at
feet of Jesus Christ.
John Wesley's language that I introduced at the beginning, it's to help people understand that they are depraved sinners
Absolutely.
in need of salvation, and then to offer them the pathway that leads to salvation through Christ Jesus. And if that's not your interest, you shouldn't be in ministry.
Right.
Because you're not a Christian.
Right. And
Ouch. You
we're
said you're right to
called-
that.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay.
That's where we should be. So is there a thing of a centrist? Yes, no, maybe.
So there are people who identify as
Right,
centrist, but
right. Is
just
there
because you
actually-
identify a certain way doesn't
Right.
make you a certain way.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, you're meaner than I thought you would be. Good.
I mean, I called
So
one of my mentors.
when I say mean, I don't think
I'm
either of us are
mean.
being. Is it a
No.
mean thing to speak truth?
No, absolutely not. I think that the truth comes through a lens that oftentimes people forget that is very hard for us to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we speak truth, oftentimes we're put into this capsule of we're mean.
Yeah.
And it's unfair.
That's the sign of the times we're living in.
Yeah.
Let's talk about our last topic. I don't have an article to show you because nobody's written it yet. But we have a special called Annual Conference in October in the Oklahoma Annual Conference. And it's supposed to be focused on dismissing churches that have gone through the 2553 process and voting on the conference budget. Now, I've been a member of the Annual Conference for some time. I've been a local licensed pastor, some nobody off in the sticks. So I haven't looked at the budget. I mean, I've looked at what they put in the conference, pre-conference journal, but I haven't really looked. I haven't really scrutinized and said, oh, we should do things different here. I always assumed that was going on by the big pastors who are paying a lot more in apportionments, by the more fiscally minded people, by our CFNA. I assumed that they were looking at how much money do we have? How much money has been coming in? How much money are we wanting to spend? I assumed that there were lots of people with eagle eyes looking at the whole thing. So in preparation for annual conference this year, I'm going to be out front with it. I want to do what they did in Central Texas and Northwest Texas Annual Conference. Yeah. I want to look at what financial reserves we have. I want to designate them to cover the cost of the unfunded pension liabilities so that churches that want to leave are not unduly burdened to go.
Yeah.
And I talked to a pastor in Central Texas that knows what they did there. He said the conference didn't have to spend any money to do that. They just had to redesignate it for a period of time till Westpath was happy. That's our financial organization that oversees that. Then they can change it back. You have a scenario where nobody has to pay anything. This bill is not going to come due. It's based on the worst actuarial table that if it happens, we're not going to owe anything because the whole financial system has collapsed. It's just not going to happen. So we have a scenario that's workable. So I know that we need to be able to designate the funds that are reserved that can be redesignated. So I wrote our conference treasurer, Joe Holt, who by all accounts is a very capable, very friendly guy, doing a very good job, said, can I have the financial accounting of all of our funds, what the balances are, and how they're designated. And he was very kind in his predisposition. He said, you'll be happy to know we report this to the General Counsel of Finance and Administration, and here's our annual audits, and we've passed with flying colors. And I saw the audits, and they're great, but they don't give the information I was asking for. So we had a couple more back and forths, and then I said, so let me understand this. You have the reports. You can generate them. You're just not going to give them to me. And he never responded. I've talked to other people since then. I've come to understand that at least 5 other people, much higher up than I, ordained elders, big church people, have asked for this information, and he has not provided it. I'm also aware Kara, who's at the head of Kara Nicholas, lawyer at the head of our delegation for General Conference, Jurisdictional Conference, let them know that according to Oklahoma state law, shareholders are entitled to this information. He responded saying, no, according to that law, it's only for for-profit organizations. She's quite certain she's in the right. I don't know. I'm not a legal expert. What I do know is, as a pastor of a local church, if someone asks me for a financial accounting, I'm fully transparent. I cannot have the image of being secretive about money, hoarding money, moving money around. I need to be able to show, here's our money, here's how much we have, here's how we're being stewards of it. I'm taking money from people in the local church here and sending it to the annual conference. And I always assumed that they had the same ethics as I did, of transparency and making sure that the people who were putting money in felt good about that. Turns out, and I can't tell you how I came across this information, even the people who sit on the Council of Finance and Administration, the people we thought had the hand on the wheel, they don't see this information. What is there to say about this, Kira? Am I taking crazy pills? Should I be okay with this?
No, you should not be okay with this. This is the issue of our church. We are hiding things that we shouldn't be hiding. This should be accessible to all people. This is why the local churches are struggling, because we have leaders in the church who are not doing their job correctly.
So I talked to this guy in Central Texas. He said their conference hasn't reported this stuff either. He was only able to get a hold of it. Well, I can't talk about that. I'm wondering if this is the cultural norm throughout the entire denomination.
I would guess it is. So what are we hiding in the greater conference? Like, how much more does this say about our Council of Bishops? Who is running the show of the United Methodist Church?
Well, I just find it so strange. Our Book of Discipline stipulates it is the obligation of the local church to pay fully apportionments.
Yeah.
It is the obligation of the pastor to help the church pay the apportionments. But there is nothing about it's the obligation of the bishop or annual conference leadership to transparently report the finances. It seems to me that the seeds of this current dissension were sown decades ago.
High up, yeah.
So, and that results in me, I am frustrated with the powers that be for being okay with that. If I understand the situation correctly, and it's possible I don't, because I'm an idiot, but if I understand it correctly, this is highly unethical, immoral, unexcusable, not just for Christians, but for just normal people. A normal nonprofit should be. I'm frustrated with the people at the helm right now. But I find myself increasingly resentful of those who have been in positions of authority all the way along, who are theologically sympathetic to me, who have not fought this battle before, who have chosen to get along rather than hold people's feet to the fire and insist on a righteous standard. And then the final thing, the coup de grace on this, where I'm at right now, is we have I would consider this a crisis, this financial thing. But a lot of people, they say, well, we had the CFNA in charge and we just trusted them. There's another crisis of our own making. That is that the Board of Ordained Ministry in many annual conference has let people through that do not actually agree with the Book of Discipline, our articles of religion, or our sexual morality. They have let people through. They have not asked the questions. Even when they have, they act like the answers don't matter. This has been going on for decades. And all the way along, every year at annual conference, the elders get together and say, yes, we affirm them. We trust what the Board of Ordained Ministry has done. I'm upset by this. I think that is, it's not as though we were not given authority to run the church. It's that we chose not to use it. And so we have these different things in place. We have a voted annual conference every year. We could have insisted on things being right. But for decades, we shrugged. And so, of course, this is what happens. So I can't be mad at the liberals nearly as mad as I am at the conservatives who sat silently by and every year justified themselves as they drove the UMC into the ground.
Where's the boldness that Jesus talks about?
Yeah.
Where are we being like Jesus when we're not doing these things? And I think this has caused the trickling down into our churches. I don't want to speak too much to this, but we've had churches who have had pastors who have not been truthful about money. We have people in our churches who are not doing the things that are supposed to be done correctly with money. And if we can't hold ourselves accountable at the top, then we can't hold each other accountable at the bottom.
Yeah, it's especially ironic that we belong to the Wesleyan tradition, a centerpiece of which is accountability. And we've made it the opposite.
Flipped over right now in his grave.
Well, on that note, let's close out this section. This is going to be end of part 1. Join us for part 2 to learn about Kira, and we're going to talk a little bit about women in ministry, and we'll see what else comes up.